For centuries, the Tyrell had believed themselves safe. Their society was built on commerce, art, and diplomacy rather than on armies or warships. They had treaties with neighbors, trade agreements with rivals, and vast wealth stored in orbital banks. The Tyrell had never seen the need to develop weapons beyond ceremonial defense fleets. That was before the Kargath Dominion arrived. The Kargath were not like other empires. They did not negotiate. They did not barter. They expanded, conquering star by star, system by system, until the Tyrell fell within their shadow. When the Kargath fleet entered Confederacy space, they did not demand tribute or surrender. They simply attacked. The outer colonies fell first. Orbital defense stations were gutted in minutes, their wreckage turned into slag raining down on once thriving cities. Millions perished before the Tyrell understood what was happening. The Kargath's ships were massive, built for siege, and bristled with weapons the Tyrell had never imagined. Within 2 weeks, 3 Tyrell worlds had been stripped of their populations. Those who survived were loaded onto slave transports. Vanishing into the Dominion's infamous labor worlds, panic spread like fire. Refugees poured into the central systems, overwhelming cities already struggling to adapt to wartime shortages. The Tyrell fleet, designed more for ceremonial parades than battle, attempted to intercept the invaders. It was annihilated in the first engagement. Now, only Varos Prime, the Tyrell homeworld, remained. High Chancellor Vera Tilan stood in the central council chamber, her tall frame trembling as she listened to the reports. Her people were proud, but she could see the despair in the eyes of her ministers. Their fleets were gone, their defenses shattered, and the Kargath armada now orbited Varos Prime like vultures circling a dying beast. There is nothing left, one minister whispered bitterly. We must accept that the Confederacy is finished. Vera shook her head, but her voice lacked conviction. We will find a way. We must. In that moment of desperation, an ancient idea surfaced. Deep in the archives, older than the Confederacy itself, lay a relic, a long-range distress beacon, crafted by a civilization that had passed through the Tyrell systems millennia ago. It was crude by modern standards, inefficient, untargeted, little more than a cosmic shout hurled into the void. But unlike their normal distress relays, this one could travel farther than light years of established communication networks. It could reach beyond the known. Few among the Tyrell trusted the relic. The last time it had been activated, during a trade crisis centuries ago, no one had answered. It was a ghost of a technology, a myth more than a weapon. But now, with the Kargath poised to enslave their homeworld, what choice did they have? The beacon was hauled from its tomb in the archives and brought to the orbital command station. Engineers studied its strange mechanisms, its crude crystalline core, and its pulsing emitter dish. With trembling claws, they prepared it for activation. Chancellor. Vera herself oversaw the moment. She entered the message personally, her voice shaking as she spoke. This is the Tyrell Confederacy. We are under attack by the Kargath Dominion. Our fleets are gone. Our people are dying. To whoever hears this, please, help us. The engineers transmitted the message, then again and again, until the beacon's core burned white-hot. The signal hurled itself into the void, leaping across the galactic rim and through interstellar dark where no relay stations existed. It would take weeks, perhaps months, to reach anyone capable of hearing. If anyone at all remained to listen, when the message ended, silence fell in the chamber. One minister broke it with a bitter laugh. We shout into the void like children screaming at storms. Who will hear us? Who will risk the wrath of the Kargath for us? Vera said nothing. Her crest was lowered, her eyes fixed on the stars. She did not believe the beacon would save them. But at least they would die, knowing they had tried. What no one in that chamber realized was that the signal did not vanish into the dark. It leapt past the Confederacy's borders, past the Dominion's fleets, past the settled corridors of the galaxy. It carried on, defiant and insistent, until it reached a world the galactic community had long chosen to ignore. Earth. On Earth, the signal did not fall on deaf ears. The Terran Defense Council convened within hours of intercepting it. Generals, admirals, and leaders debated fiercely. Some argued to remain silent. Earth owed the galaxy nothing. Others insisted this was their chance to remind the galaxy that humanity had not forgotten its reputation as a Deathworld species. In the end, the decision was unanimous. Humanity would answer. Where once its skies were alive with trading vessels and gleaming transports, now only the silhouettes of warships lingered above, vast shadows blotting out the stars. The Kargath Dominion had encircled the planet, their fleet forming a strangling cordon in low orbit. The citizens of Varos Prime lived under that oppressive darkness. From the surface, children pointed to the sky not in wonder but in fear, watching the massive hulls move like carrion beasts. Refugees filled the streets, carrying what little they had left after fleeing scorched colonies. Food shortages sparked. Riots. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded from orbital bombardments. The Tyrell government, once proud and orderly, now teetered on collapse. High Chancellor Vera Talon convened her council within the Grand Chamber. The tall, crystalline walls that had once symbolized transparency now felt like a cage. She stood before her ministers, her posture rigid, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "We have sent the call," she began, her voice echoing through the chamber. "The beacon is active. Our message is cast across the stars." One minister scoffed, his crest twitching in agitation. "A message hurled into the void? Chancellor, with respect, it was desperation. The galaxy will not risk the Dominion's wrath for us." Another, a frail diplomat, shook her head in despair. "Even if someone heard, it would take weeks, months, to reach us. By then, we will be gone." Vera wanted to argue. She wanted to assure them. But deep inside, she feared they were right. The Dominion had never been defeated in open combat. Even mighty empires had bent the knee rather than risk annihilation. Why would anyone intervene now? Her words were cut short by the urgent cry of a comms officer bursting into the chamber. "Chancellor! Unidentified fleet detected on long-range sensors. Hundreds of vessels, dropping from slip space at the system's edge." The chamber erupted. In chaos, ministers shouted over one another, some in fear, some in hope. "Reinforcements from the Dominion. No! Another enemy seeking to pick our bones." Could it be allies? Vera silenced them with a raised hand. "Show us." A hollow projection filled the chamber. The image was grainy, distorted by interference, but clear enough to reveal the truth. A fleet had indeed arrived. Their hulls were black and angular, bristling with weapons. Their formation was tight, purposeful. They bore no crest of the Dominion, no insignia of any galactic empire. Instead, a single symbol shone on their hulls, a circle split by a jagged scar, simple but unmistakable to those who knew their history. The humans had come. Vera's crest flattened in disbelief. She had heard of them only in whispers, scattered reports buried deep in ancient archives. A species from a death world, whose history was written in endless wars, whose resilience had allowed them to survive on a planet the galactic community deemed uninhabitable. Most dismissed them as myth or exaggeration. Others said they had retreated from galactic affairs, unwilling to mingle with civilized species. Yet here they were. Before the Council could absorb the revelation, alarms blared again. The Dominion fleet was moving. The Kargath, confident in their superiority, dispatched a forward detachment to intercept the newcomers. The Tyrell ministers huddled together in dread. "The humans will be crushed as easily as we were." They cannot stand against the Dominion. No one can. But what followed silenced them all. The moment the Kargath warships engaged, the foreign fleet struck back with terrifying precision. The first volley from the humans was like nothing the Tyrell had ever seen. Rail slugs traveling at near-light speeds, kinetic weapons that tore through Dominion shields as if they were vapor. Missiles, not the posturing plasma weapons of the galaxy, but cold, ruthless devices designed only to kill, streaked into formations and detonated in blinding fire. In seconds, the Kargath vanguard, ships that had annihilated the Confederacies, defenses with ease, were reduced to drifting wreckage. The chamber was silent as they watched the destruction unfold in real time. Ministers who had spoken only in fear now stared wide-eyed at the holofeed. The Dominion, the unstoppable empire, was bleeding. Vera whispered, her voice barely audible. The myths were true. Her ministers turned to her, some with terror, some with awe. The humans had come not as saviors wrapped in diplomacy, but as predators entering a battlefield. They fought without hesitation, without restraint. The Kargath regrouped, sending more ships. The battle intensified, brilliant flares painting the skies above Varos Prime. But already, the tide had shifted. For the first time since the Dominion's arrival, the Tyrell felt something they had thought lost forever. The Kargath Dominion, furious at the intrusion, committed nearly their entire siege fleet, thousands of warships repositioned in a tightening noose, determined to crush the interlopers before they could threaten the blockade. Their commanders were confident. After all, no species had ever withstood their full might. On the bridge of the human flagship, TDS Resolute, Admiral Elena Markov watched the tactical display bloom with enemy signatures. Red icons filled the grid like a swarm of hornets. Estimated 2,000 enemy vessels, Admiral, her sensor officer reported. Forming an encirclement. Markov's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. They think we'll play by their rules. To her, the Dominion's formation was familiar, predictable. She had studied the combat doctrines of empires across the stars, and she knew one truth. Civilizations that grew too accustomed to their own power became lazy. The Kargath fought wars of intimidation, wars of superiority, wars meant to cow their opponents into surrender. Humanity did not fight that way. Humanity fought to survive, and survival demanded ingenuity, ferocity, and unpredictability. She turned to her staff. Signal the fleet. Initiate Wolfpack protocol. Across the human armada, ships shifted formation. Instead of presenting a solid wall of firepower, they broke apart into smaller hunting groups, weaving erratically through the void. It was madness to the Kargath. No discipline, no order. But to the humans, it was instinct. On Earth, predators. Hunted not in lines but in packs, striking from unexpected angles. The Dominion opened fire first. Brilliant beams of plasma carved through space, a dazzling wall of energy that would have incinerated most opponents. But the human ships weren't there. They darted aside, accelerating with brutal thruster bursts, letting the energy sail harmlessly into the abyss. Then came humanity's reply. Rail cannons thundered. The kinetic slugs they fired were invisible to the naked eye, traveling at near-relativistic speeds. Shields, so effective against plasma and energy weapons, meant nothing against the sheer momentum of hardened tungsten slamming into hulls. The first salvo ripped through a dozen Dominion cruisers, leaving behind twisted wrecks and silent fireballs. Missile swarms followed, dozens of small, intelligent warheads streaking into enemy clusters. The Dominion tried to jam them, but the missiles adapted, splitting, weaving, pursuing relentlessly until they found targets. Explosions rippled across the blockade line, scattering the once-tight formation. From the surface of Varos Prime, civilians gasped as the night sky lit with fire. For so long, the only glow had been from bombardments and falling debris. Now, the heavens blazed with the fury of a fleet that fought like predators unleashed. Inside the Dominion flagship, panic spread among the crew. Their commander, a scaled brute named Lord Kazarak, slammed his claws against the command rail. "They are primitives! Their ships are nothing compared to ours." But his words rang hollow as the display showed reality. Squadrons that had crushed the Tyrell defense fleet with ease were being torn apart in minutes. The humans didn't fight with fear or hesitation. They fought with cold efficiency. Admiral Markov's voice cut across human comms, steady and sharp. "Target their command ships, break their coordination, leave them scattered and blind." Human destroyers dove through the enemy ranks, smaller but faster than the hulking Dominion cruisers. They struck at weak points, venting entire decks into vacuum. Carriers unleashed drone swarms, autonomous craft that harassed the enemy relentlessly, pecking at engines and sensor arrays until larger vessels could deliver the killing blow. The Kargath tried to adapt. They regrouped, pulling into a defensive sphere, but humanity had seen that before, too. The Resolute's main railgun charged, power surging through superconducting coils. With a shuddering roar, it launched a slug the size of a shuttle directly into the Dominion's central battleship. The impact tore the vessel in half. One moment, it was a proud symbol of Dominion power. The next, it was nothing but debris tumbling through space. The shock rippled through the Kargath fleet, not just physical, but psychological. Their myth of invincibility was shattering before their eyes. On Varos Prime in the Grand Chamber, Chancellor Vera and her ministers watched in stunned silence. The holofeed showed the impossible. The Dominion retreating, their warships scattering before the relentless advance of the humans. "They fight like no others," one minister whispered, awestruck. "Not like soldiers, like predators," another added. Vera's gaze lingered on the human insignia glowing on the hulls. A simple circle, scarred down the middle. A reminder, perhaps, that even in unity, humanity carried the memory of scars and survival. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome had been decided within minutes. By the time the Kargath pulled back, their once proud blockade was in tatters. Dozens of ships destroyed, hundreds crippled. Admiral Markov stood on the Resolute's bridge, eyes calm as she surveyed the battlefield. Humanity had announced its return to the galaxy, not with words, but with fire. The Dominion had been defeated. Defeated. The phrase itself was almost unthinkable. Entire civilizations had spent centuries cowering at the very mention of the Kargath. Their fleets were the embodiment of inevitability. To resist was to be enslaved or annihilated. Yet now every encrypted channel, every pirate frequency, every diplomatic relay buzzed with the same whispered truth. The impossible had happened. The Kargath had bled, and the ones who had bled them were a species long dismissed as irrelevant. Humans. The word carried weight in ways most had forgotten. For generations, Earth had been labeled as a Class 15 death world, a planet so hostile that most species deemed it uninhabitable for intelligent life. The creatures that survived there, storms that leveled continents, predators with teeth like blades, diseases that shredded the unprepared, were considered nightmares by the galactic community. That anything had not only survived but thrived, there was treated less as fact and more as legend. Legends, it seemed, had just walked out of the dark and into the stars again. On worlds across the galactic core, governments convened emergency sessions. In the markets of smugglers and slavers, fear dampened the usual bravado. Pirate lords who had once boasted of raiding undefended colonies now whispered nervously about what would happen if a distress call ever summoned those predators again. Even empires untouched by the Kargath War stirred uneasily. If humans could crush the Dominion's blockade, what else were they capable of? Meanwhile, on Varos Prime, the people lived through the immediate aftermath. The skies, once filled with the silhouettes of their oppressors, now glimmered with the vast shadows of human ships. The difference was subtle, but profound. Where Kargath vessels radiated menace, the human fleet radiated something stranger. Calm, controlled lethality, the presence of predators at rest. Dangerous not because they flaunted it, but because they didn't need to. Chancellor Vera Talon stood at the foot of the grand spire, awaiting the landing of a shuttle from the human flagship. Around her, crowds gathered, straining to see the beings who had carved salvation from the jaws of despair. When the shuttle doors opened, silence swept the square. Admiral Elena Markov descended first. She was shorter than most Tyrell, her build, compact, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She wore no flowing robes of ceremony, no ornate armor, just a plain uniform and the insignia of her rank. Behind her marched human soldiers in dark exosuits, their movements fluid, disciplined, efficient. The Tyrell counselors stiffened instinctively. They had faced Kargath soldiers, towering brutes who swaggered with cruelty. The humans were different. Their calm composure was more unnerving than any display of arrogance. Vera stepped forward, her crest lowered in respect. Admiral Markov, on behalf of the Tyrell Confederacy, we thank you. Without you, we would be enslaved, Markov finished bluntly. Her voice was steady, her tone almost clinical. We've seen it before. We weren't going to let it happen again. The words struck Vera like a shock. This was no speech crafted for diplomacy. It was a simple truth, delivered without embellishment. You heard our call? She said softly, still struggling to believe it. Markov nodded once. Deathworlders don't ignore distress signals. The words rippled through the gathered crowd. Some flinched at the term Deathworlders, for to most of the galaxy it was a label of horror. But in that moment, the phrase was transformed. It was not a curse. It was a promise. In the days that followed, human engineers worked alongside Tyrell technicians to restore power grids, stabilize orbital defenses, and provide food from emergency rations. They asked for nothing in return, not territory, not tribute, not even trade agreements. Still, their presence stirred unease. Parents whispered to their children not to approach the humans too closely. Soldiers avoided their eyes. The Tyrell had grown so used to the idea of humans as monsters of myth that seeing them in flesh was disorienting. But every night, as the skies lit with the slow clearing of wreckage, the people slept more peacefully than they had in months. Far beyond Veros Prime, the Kargath seethed in rage. Their surviving admirals spun tales of ambush and treachery to mask their humiliation. But no matter how they twisted the narrative, they could not erase the truth. The Dominion had faced humanity and lost. And that truth spread like wildfire. The galaxy now looked at Earth with new eyes, not as a forgotten backwater, but as a rising storm. For the first time in centuries, power balances shifted. The battlefield lay quiet, though not with the peace of resolution. The silence that now hung over Korath Prime's orbit was the kind that came only after unfathomable violence. The Vakari dreadnoughts, once proud symbols of their dominance, now drifted as shattered hulks, torn apart by the human fleet's relentless precision. Alien survivors huddled within escape pods, their signals flaring across the void. But they did not dare send distress calls, not anymore. Not when they had witnessed what came in answer to the Oliari plea. On the Oliari command bridge, Elder Tavor stood transfixed by the sight. His species, frail by nature, had survived the Yaiki galaxy's cruelties by appeasing stronger powers. They had always believed mercy was bought with tribute, not earned with resistance. Yet here was an alien truth. Humans did not demand tribute. They demanded justice. The comm screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Reyes. His uniform was scorched, his face drawn, but his voice was steady. "Vakari fleet neutralized," he said flatly. "Your system is secure. For now. Tavor." bowed deeply, unsure how one expressed gratitude to beings who carried such terrifying power. "You have saved us. The Olyari will never forget this debt." Reyes's gaze hardened. "Do not think of it as a debt. Think of it as a warning. The galaxy is full of predators who mistake compassion for weakness. We came because you asked for help, but next time—" He leaned closer to the screen. "Next time, you fight alongside us." The Olyari elders exchanged uncertain looks. They had expected saviors. Instead, they found mentors, or perhaps wardens. On the human flagship Resolute, the mood was no more celebratory. The crew sat in silence, haunted by the wreckage drifting beyond the viewports. Lieutenant Morgan broke the stillness. "Admiral, reports confirm 30% of Vakari's ships escaped the engagement. They'll regroup." Reyes nodded. "Good. Let them. The Vakari need to remember this day every time they dare move against the weak. Let them tell their children what happens when they rattle Deathworlders' cages." The word hung in the air. Deathworlders. The term the galaxy used as a curse, humans now wore as armor. And today, it had proven true. In the Galactic Council chambers, chaos reigned. Reports of the battle reached every delegation. The Vakari envoy protested furiously, calling the human response unlawful interference. But their words were drowned by fear. 30 dreadnoughts, gone in less than an hour, hissed one delegate. "Humans are monsters, machines of annihilation," whispered another. Yet beneath their fear was something more dangerous: calculation. For while some species trembled, others began to wonder if aligning with Earth meant survival. The balance of power had shifted, and every government knew it. The Olyari ambassador stepped forward. His voice quavered, but his words struck like iron. "The humans came when none of you would. Remember that. When we were dying, they answered." A hush followed. For the first time in living memory, the Olyari spoke not as supplicants, but as survivors. Back on Korath Prime, Olyari citizens looked to the skies with awe. Where once they saw stars as distant and indifferent, now they saw them as doorways, through which allies might come. Children pressed their hands to windows, pointing at the wreckage gleaming in orbit. They would grow up with stories, not of defeat, but of the day Deathworlders arrived and turned despair into hope. Admiral Reyes stood alone on the observation deck of the Resolute. His hands rested behind his back, his gaze fixed on the ruins of the Vakari fleet. He thought of Earth, its storms, its unforgiving terrain, its endless struggle for survival. To outsiders, it was a nightmare. To humans, it was home. He whispered into the silence, words not meant for records, but for memory. "They called us monsters. Perhaps they're right. But monsters can guard gates just as well as they can tear them down." The stars shimmered in quiet agreement.